He didn't come home all night. At midnight, he walked in smiling, mocking, cruel, and certain of his power. But what he didn't know was that the silence he mistook for weakness was already his undoing. Secrets buried for 10 years were about to rise, and by morning, his nightmare would begin. Please hit that like button and subscribe. I'd love to know what country you are listening from. Drop a comment below and enjoy the listen. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with cruel precision, each second a reminder that Ethan hadn't come home. Claire sat on the edge of the leather couch, her phone resting on her thigh like a dead weight. 10 missed calls. No replies. No texts. Just silence. Outside, the wind rustled the oak trees lining their quiet cul-de-sac in Fairfax County. The neighborhood was asleep, porch lights dimmed, curtains drawn, dogs curled up in their kennels. But inside the Whitmore house, tension hung like fog. Claire didn't cry. She hadn't cried in weeks. Not since the first time Ethan came home smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. Not since she found the receipt for a hotel in Georgetown tucked inside his glove compartment. Not since she saw the name Marissa scribbled on a napkin in his briefcase. She had learned to wait. To listen. To watch. At 12:07 a.m., the front door creaked open. Ethan stepped inside, his coat slung over one shoulder, his tie loosened, his smile wide and unrepentant. He looked like a man who had won something. Claire didn't move. He paused in the doorway, eyes scanning her face. "What are you staring at?" he said, voice thick with arrogance. "I was with the best woman in the world, and you'll never be like her." The words sliced through the air like glass. Claire blinked once. Then twice. She said nothing. Ethan scoffed, tossed his coat onto the banister, and walked past her into the kitchen. The sound of the refrigerator door opening, the clink of a beer bottle, the hiss of carbonation, each sound etched itself into her memory. She rose slowly, walked upstairs, and closed the bedroom door behind her. She didn't sleep. Instead, she opened her laptop, entered the password, and clicked on a folder labeled Whitmore Evidence. Inside were dozens of files, photos, emails, bank statements, surveillance footage. All compiled by a private investigator named Marcus Bell, a former FBI analyst turned freelance operative. Claire had hired him 6 weeks ago. She clicked on the latest file, a grainy photo of Ethan standing outside a townhouse in Arlington, his arm around a woman with auburn hair and a scar above her left eyebrow. Claire zoomed in. The woman wasn't Marissa. She was someone else. Someone Claire recognized. Her name was Isabel Hartman, Ethan's ex-wife. The one he claimed had died in a car accident 10 years ago. Claire's pulse quickened, but her face remained calm. She closed the laptop, turned off the light, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, Ethan's nightmare would begin. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting pale stripes across the hardwood floor. Claire sat at the kitchen island, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug. Ethan was still asleep upstairs, snoring like a man who believed the world owed him peace. She opened her laptop again, the same folder waiting for her, Whitmore Evidence. Inside, the files were organized by date, each labeled with cold precision: hotel receipts, surveillance footage, phone records, alias activity. Marcus Bell didn't miss details. That's why she chose him. Claire clicked on a video file dated 2 nights ago. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Ethan stood outside a townhouse in Arlington, laughing with a woman. She wore a long coat, her auburn hair tucked into a loose bun. Claire paused the video and zoomed in. The scar above her left eyebrow was unmistakable. Isabel Hartman. Claire's breath caught. She hadn't seen that face in over a decade. Isabel had been Ethan's first wife, the one he claimed died in a car crash on Route 29. There had been a funeral. A closed casket. Claire remembered the way Ethan cried, how convincing it had seemed. But Isabel wasn't dead. Claire opened the PI's latest report. Marcus had traced Isabel's movements to a private clinic in Vermont, where she had checked in under the name Anna Carlisle, a name Ethan had used in offshore transfers. The clinic specialized in trauma recovery and identity protection. The implications were staggering. Claire scrolled further. There were emails, encrypted messages between Ethan and a man named Dr. Lyle, discussing containment protocols and financial disbursements. There was a scanned copy of a birth certificate, Isabel's, but altered. The date of death had been forged. Claire's hands trembled, but her mind was sharp. She opened a new document and began compiling a timeline. Every lie. Every transaction. Every moment Ethan had manipulated reality. She wasn't just dealing with infidelity. She was dealing with a man who had faked a death, laundered money, and possibly coerced a woman into disappearing. And now he was sleeping upstairs, oblivious. Claire closed the laptop and looked out the window. The neighborhood was waking up, sprinklers hissing, joggers passing by, children waiting for school buses. But inside the Whitmore house, a storm was brewing. She picked up her phone and texted Marcus, "We need to meet. Today." Claire sat in her car outside the cafe on Main Street, her fingers drumming against the steering wheel. The morning air was crisp, the kind that carried the scent of roasted beans and fresh bread from the bakery next door. She wasn't here for coffee. She was here for Marcus Bell. The private investigator arrived exactly on time, his trench coat buttoned, his briefcase tucked under one arm. He slid into the passenger seat without a word, his eyes scanning the street before settling on her. "You saw the footage," he said. Claire nodded. "It's Isabel." Marcus opened the briefcase and pulled out a stack of files. Isabel Hartman. Alive. Living under the alias Anna Carlisle. She's been in and out of clinics, mostly trauma recovery centers. Ethan's been funding her, quietly, through offshore accounts. Claire's stomach tightened. "He told me she died. I went to her funeral." Marcus leaned back. Closed casket. No autopsy records. No death certificate filed with the state. It was staged. Claire's mind raced. The scar above Isabel's eyebrow flashed in her memory. She remembered Ethan's story about the crash, how he claimed Isabel's body was too damaged to view. She remembered the tears, the trembling hands, the way he clung to her for comfort. It had all been theater. Why keep her alive? Claire whispered. Marcus tapped the folder. Control. Isabel knows something Ethan doesn't want exposed. My guess? Financial crimes. Maybe worse. Claire flipped through the documents. Bank transfers, encrypted emails, clinic intake forms. Each piece was a thread in a web Ethan had spun for years. And Isabel was at the center. Marcus lowered his voice. Claire, if Isabel talks, Ethan's entire life collapses. Fraud, conspiracy, maybe even homicide if she reveals what really happened 10 years ago. Claire closed the folder, her pulse steady. Then we need to find her. Marcus studied her face. Are you sure? If Ethan realizes you're involved, I'm already involved, Claire cut in. He thinks I'm blind. He thinks I'll stay quiet. But I know more than he realizes. Marcus nodded slowly. Then we'll move carefully. I'll track Isabel's current location. You keep documenting everything Ethan does. Every word, every move. Claire exhaled, her resolve hardening. Ethan's arrogance last night, the smirk, the cruel words, suddenly seemed small compared to the storm that was about to break over him. She started the car, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Isabel wasn't just a ghost from Ethan's past. She was the key to his downfall. And Claire was ready to unlock the truth. Claire sat at her desk in the upstairs study, the hum of the computer filling the silence. Ethan had left for work an hour ago, his cologne lingering faintly in the hallway. She waited until she heard his car pull away before opening Marcus's encrypted email. The subject line read, Whitmore Offshore Holdings. Her pulse quickened as she clicked. The report was meticulous as bank statements, wire transfers, shell corporations registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. Ethan had built a labyrinth of accounts, each designed to hide money from scrutiny. Millions of dollars moved in quiet streams across borders, disguised as consulting fees, property investments, and charitable donations. Claire scrolled through the documents, her eyes narrowing. One account stood out, Hartman Trust, registered under Isabel's maiden name. The deposits were regular, timed with Ethan's business trips. He wasn't just supporting Isabel. He was funneling money into her survival, keeping her tethered to him. Claire leaned back, her mind racing. Ethan had always been careful with money, obsessive even. He tracked every grocery receipt, every utility bill. But this was reckless. Dangerous. If the IRS or FBI uncovered it, his career, his reputation, his freedom would vanish overnight. She opened a new spreadsheet and began cataloging the transfers. Dates, amounts, recipients. Each entry was a nail in Ethan's coffin. She added her own notes: possible fraud, possible coercion, possible conspiracy. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus: be cautious. If he suspects you know, he'll turn on you. Claire typed back: he won't suspect. I'm quiet. That's my strength. She closed the laptop and walked to the window. Outside, the neighborhood was alive with ordinary routines: children riding bikes, neighbors mowing lawns, delivery trucks rumbling down the street. No one knew that inside the Whitmore house, a war was being waged in silence. Downstairs, Ethan's briefcase sat on the counter. Claire opened it carefully, rifling through the papers. Business contracts, client lists, expense reports. She found a folded envelope tucked into the side pocket. Inside was a bank statement: Whitmore Holdings LLC, balance, $2.3 million. Claire smiled faintly. He had left the evidence in plain sight. She slipped the envelope back, closed the briefcase, and returned upstairs. Her plan was forming, piece by piece. She would freeze the accounts, tip off the authorities, and let Ethan's empire crumble around him. But first, she needed Isabel. Isabel was the key, the witness, the proof, the ghost who had returned to haunt him. Claire shut the laptop and whispered to herself, tomorrow, the nightmare deepens. The morning began like any other. Ethan strode into the kitchen, crisp suit, polished shoes, the swagger of a man convinced the world bent to his will. He kissed Claire on the cheek, too casually, too rehearsed, and grabbed his briefcase. Big meeting today, he said, flashing that same smug grin. Don't wait up. Claire nodded, her face unreadable. She watched him leave, her silence sharper than any blade. By noon, Ethan's phone began buzzing. First, a call from his assistant: the IRS had flagged discrepancies in his company's accounts. Then, a message from his business partner: a client had withdrawn a multi-million-dollar contract, citing ethical concerns. Ethan's confidence faltered. He barked orders, demanded explanations, but the answers were all the same: something was wrong, and it was unraveling fast. At 3 p.m., another blow landed. A journalist from the Washington Post emailed him directly, asking for comment on allegations of offshore accounts linked to shell corporations. Ethan slammed his phone down, his hands trembling. Meanwhile, Claire sat in the study, her laptop open, her notes meticulous. She had tipped off the IRS anonymously, forwarding Marcus's evidence. She had whispered to the journalist through a secure channel, planting seeds of doubt. Upstairs, Ethan paced the bedroom, muttering to himself. His arrogance was cracking, replaced by paranoia. He poured a drink, then another, his composure slipping with each swallow. By evening, he stormed into the kitchen, his face flushed. Someone's coming after me, he growled. Do you know anything about this? Claire looked up from her book, her expression calm. No, she said softly. Her silence was her weapon. Ethan slammed the glass onto the counter, shards scattering across the tile. This is war, he hissed. and I'll find out who's behind it. Claire didn't flinch. She simply closed her book, stood, and walked upstairs. Behind her, Ethan's nightmare had begun. The storm outside had rolled in quickly, thunder rumbling across the Virginia sky. Rain lashed against the windows, streaking the glass in jagged lines. Inside the Whitmore house, the tension was thicker than the storm clouds. Ethan paced the living room, his tie loosened, his shirt collar damp with sweat. His eyes darted from the window to Claire, who sat calmly in the armchair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "You're too quiet," he snapped, his voice sharp. "You sit there like you know something. Do you?" Claire tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "What makes you think that?" Ethan slammed his fist against the mantel, the sound echoing through the room. "Because everything is falling apart. My accounts are frozen, my clients are pulling out, and now the damn IRS is sniffing around. Someone's feeding them information. Someone close." Claire's gaze didn't waver. "Maybe you should ask yourself why they're looking." His face twisted with anger. "Don't play games with me, Claire. I've built everything we have. This house, this life, it's mine. And now someone's trying to take it away." She rose slowly, her movements deliberate, and walked to the bookshelf. Sliding her fingers across the spines, she pulled out a small black notebook. She opened it, revealing neat handwriting, dates, times, Ethan's late arrivals, his phone calls, his unexplained absences. Ethan's eyes widened. "What is that?" "Documentation," she said softly. "Patterns. Behavior. Evidence." He lunged forward, snatching the notebook from her hands. His fingers trembled as he flipped through the pages. "You've been spying on me?" Claire's voice was calm, almost soothing. "Observing. Recording. Preparing." Ethan's breath came in short bursts. He threw the notebook onto the floor, the pages scattering. "You think you're clever? You think you can trap me?" Claire bent down, gathering the pages one by one. "I don't need to trap you, Ethan. You're doing that yourself." The storm outside cracked with lightning, illuminating his face, sweat, rage, and something else, fear. He grabbed her wrist suddenly, his grip tight. "Tell me what you know. Tell me who you've spoken to." Claire met his eyes, unflinching. "You want the truth?" "Yes," he shouted. She leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know Isabel is alive." The words hit him like a gunshot. His grip loosened, his face drained of color. He staggered back, collapsing onto the couch. "You don't understand," he muttered, his voice breaking. "She wasn't supposed to come back. She wasn't supposed to." His words trailed off, incoherent. Claire's phone, hidden beneath a cushion, recorded every syllable. She sat back down, her posture serene, her silence louder than his confession. Ethan buried his face in his hands, rocking slightly. "They'll destroy me if she talks. Everything I've built, gone." Claire watched him, her expression unreadable. Inside, her resolve hardened. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the unraveling, the cracks in his armor. The storm raged outside, but inside the Whitmore house, Ethan's nightmare was no longer beginning. It was accelerating. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the streets slick and shining under the pale Virginia sun. Claire sat at the dining table, her laptop open, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Marcus's latest report had given her a name, a thread she couldn't ignore. Emily Hartman. Isabel's younger sister. Claire remembered her vaguely from Ethan's stories, quiet, studious, the kind of woman who stayed out of family drama. Ethan had dismissed her as irrelevant, someone who never understood Isabel. But now, Emily was the only living link to Isabel's past. Claire dialed the number Marcus had provided. The line rang twice before a cautious voice answered. "Hello? Emily Hartman?" Claire asked, her tone steady. "Yes. Who's this?" "My name is Claire Whitmore." I'm Ethan's wife. Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. Ethan Whitmore? Emily's voice trembled. Why are you calling me? Claire closed her eyes briefly, gathering her courage. Because I know Isabel is alive. And I think you do too. The silence stretched, heavy and loaded. Finally, Emily whispered, meet me. Not here. Not over the phone. Too dangerous. They chose a small diner off Route 50, the kind of place where truckers stopped for coffee and no one asked questions. Claire arrived early, sliding into a booth near the back. She ordered tea, her hands wrapped around the warm mug as she watched the door. Emily entered 15 minutes later. She was younger than Isabel, with sharper features and wary eyes. She scanned the room before approaching Claire. You shouldn't have called me, Emily said, sliding into the booth. If Ethan finds out, he won't, Claire interrupted. He doesn't know I've been watching him. He doesn't know I've hired someone to track him. Emily's eyes widened. You've hired a PI? Claire nodded. Marcus Bell. Former FBI. He found Isabel. He found proof she's alive. Emily's hands trembled as she reached for her coffee. I knew it. I always knew she wasn't dead. Ethan lied. He staged everything. The funeral, the casket, it was all a performance. Claire leaned forward. Why? Why keep her hidden? Emily's voice dropped to a whisper. Because Isabel knew too much. Ethan was involved in fraud, money laundering through his company. Isabel discovered it. She threatened to go to the police. And then, she disappeared. Claire's stomach tightened. So he forced her into hiding? Emily nodded. He controlled her. Paid for her clinics, her new identity. He made sure she couldn't escape him. Isabel was terrified. She thought if she stayed quiet, he'd leave her alone. But he never did. Claire's pulse quickened. The puzzle pieces were snapping into place, Ethan's arrogance, his offshore accounts, his obsession with control. Isabel wasn't just a ghost from his past. She was a prisoner of his lies. Emily reached into her bag and pulled out a worn envelope. I kept this. Letters Isabel sent me years ago, before she vanished completely. She wrote about Ethan's threats, his rage, his schemes. If the police see these, they'll know he's guilty. Claire took the envelope carefully, her hand steady despite the storm inside her. This is what we need. This is how we bring him down. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Promise me you'll protect her. Isabel deserves freedom. She deserves justice. Claire's voice was firm. I promise. That evening, Ethan stormed through the front door, his face pale, his movements frantic. They're investigating me, he muttered, tossing his briefcase onto the couch. The IRS, the journalists, someone's feeding them information. Claire sat at the table, the envelope hidden in her purse. She looked up calmly. Maybe they're just seeing the truth. Ethan's eyes narrowed. You're too calm. Too quiet. What aren't you telling me? Claire smiled faintly, her silence sharper than any accusation. Upstairs, her phone recorded every word. The Whitmore house no longer felt like a home. It was a cage, rattling with Ethan's footsteps, echoing with his muttered curses. The storm from the night before had passed, but inside, the air was heavy, suffocating. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, his tie discarded, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. A half-empty bottle of bourbon stood beside him, its amber liquid catching the morning light. He poured another glass with shaking hands, spilling drops onto the table. They're everywhere, he muttered, staring at the wood grain as if it held answers. The IRS. The reporters. Even my own partners. Someone's feeding them. Someone close. Claire stood at the counter, calmly slicing an apple. The knife moved with steady precision, each slice falling neatly into the bowl. She didn't look at him. You're too calm, Ethan snapped, his voice cracking. You sit there like you know something. Do you? Claire placed the knife down gently. Maybe you should ask yourself why they're looking. His face twisted, rage and fear colliding. He slammed his fist against the table, the glass toppling, bourbon spilling across the surface. Don't play games with me, Claire. I built this life. I built everything. And now it's slipping away because someone wants to destroy me. Claire wiped her hands on a towel, her movements deliberate. Maybe it's not someone. Maybe it's you. The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Ethan froze, his breath shallow. For a moment, he looked like a man staring into a mirror for the first time. Ethan's spiral. That afternoon, Ethan stormed into his office downtown, demanding answers. His assistant avoided his gaze, her hands trembling as she handed him a stack of papers. Contracts cancelled. Accounts frozen. A subpoena from the IRS. By evening, he was back home, pacing the living room like a caged animal. His phone buzzed with unanswered calls, his email flooded with demands for explanations. He hurled the phone against the wall, the screen shattering. Claire watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable. Upstairs, her recorder captured every word, every breakdown. You think you're safe? Ethan shouted, his voice hoarse. You think silence protects you? It doesn't. If I go down, you go down with me. Claire stepped into the room, her posture calm. I'm not the one under investigation, Ethan. You are. His face contorted, veins visible at his temples. He grabbed the bourbon bottle, hurling it against the fireplace. Glass shattered, liquid seeping into the rug. He collapsed onto the couch, his hands covering his face. They'll destroy me, he whispered. Everything I've built, gone. Claire stood over him, her silence louder than his despair. Later that night, Claire met Emily in a quiet park, the lamplight casting long shadows across the path. Emily handed her another envelope, letters Isabel had written, describing Ethan's threats, his rage, his schemes. This is enough to bury him, Emily said, her voice trembling. But we need Isabel. She's the key. Claire nodded, her resolve hardening. We'll find her. And when we do, Ethan won't just lose his empire. He'll lose everything. Emily's eyes glistened with tears. Promise me he won't hurt her again. Claire's voice was steady. I promise. Back at the house, Ethan sat alone in the dark, the storm inside him raging louder than any thunder. His empire was crumbling, his secrets unraveling, his control slipping through his fingers. And Claire, silent, patient, relentless, was watching it all. The breaking point had arrived. Ethan was no longer the man who strutted through the door at midnight with a smug grin. He was a man unraveling, a man haunted, a man standing on the edge of ruin. And tomorrow, the fall would begin. The morning broke with a brittle chill, the kind that made the air feel sharp against the skin. Claire stood at the kitchen window, her coffee untouched, watching the neighborhood stir awake. Children bundled in jackets waited for the school bus. Neighbors waved as they collected newspapers. It was an ordinary day, except inside the Whitmore house, the extraordinary was about to unfold. Ethan stumbled into the kitchen, his suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot from another sleepless night. He muttered curses under his breath, rifling through papers in his briefcase. His empire was crumbling, contracts cancelled, accounts frozen, journalists circling like vultures. He was a man drowning, clawing for air. Claire's phone buzzed. A single text from Marcus, "It's happening today." Her pulse quickened, but her face remained calm. She set the phone down, her silence steady. At 9:15 a.m., the sound of engines broke the quiet street. Black SUVs rolled to a stop in front of the Whitmore house. Doors opened, and men in dark jackets stepped out, their badges glinting in the morning light. The letters were unmistakable, FBI. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispers spreading like wildfire. Ethan froze, his briefcase slipping from his hands. No, no, this can't be happening. Claire turned from the window, her voice soft but firm. It's happening. The knock on the door was sharp, authoritative. Ethan staggered back, his face pale. Claire, say something. Tell them it's a mistake. She walked to the door, opened it calmly, and stepped aside. He's inside. Two agents entered, their voices clipped and professional. Ethan Whitmore, you are under arrest for fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. Ethan's knees buckled. No, no, you don't understand. I built this company. I built everything. His voice cracked, desperation spilling out. The agents pulled his hands behind his back, the metallic click of handcuffs echoing through the room. Ethan's eyes darted to Claire, wild and pleading. You did this. You betrayed me. Claire's gaze was steady, her silence sharper than any accusation. As the agents led him out, neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, their whispers rising into a chorus. Ethan's arrogance was gone, replaced by humiliation. His empire, his lies, his control, all stripped away in front of the world. Claire stood on the porch, watching as Ethan was placed into the back of the SUV. His face pressed against the glass, his eyes hollow. For the first time, he looked small. Emily arrived moments later, her car pulling up beside the house. She stepped out, her expression a mix of relief and sorrow. It's over, she whispered. Claire nodded. No. It's beginning. Now Isabel can finally be free. Emily's eyes filled with tears. You saved her. You saved us. Claire looked at the retreating convoy, her voice calm, resolute. I didn't save him. He destroyed himself. I just made sure the world saw it. The SUVs disappeared down the street, leaving silence in their wake. Claire turned back toward the house, the weight of years lifting from her shoulders. Tomorrow, the reckoning would continue, in court, in testimony, in truth. But today, Ethan's nightmare had reached its peak. And Claire, silent and strong, had won. The courthouse was heavy with silence, the kind that pressed against the walls and made every breath feel measured. Claire sat behind the prosecution, her posture calm, her eyes steady. Ethan, once so smug, now looked hollow, his suit wrinkled, his face pale, his arrogance stripped away. The evidence unfolded like a blade. Marcus presented the files, Emily handed over Isabel's letters, and Claire's recordings played aloud, Ethan's own voice trembling with fear. She wasn't supposed to come back, they'll destroy me if she talks. Then Isabel entered. The room seemed to shift as she walked to the stand, her scar catching the light, her voice trembling but resolute. He staged my death. He kept me hidden. I lived in fear. Today, I choose freedom. The judge's verdict was swift and final, guilty on all counts. Ethan sagged in his chair, his shoulders collapsing under the weight of truth. Outside, the air felt lighter. Emily embraced Isabel, tears streaming, relief finally breaking through years of silence. Claire stood apart, watching them reclaim their lives. For the first time in years, the Whitmore house would no longer echo with secrets, it would breathe with peace. Claire closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet settle. The reckoning wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate, steady, and final. Justice had spoken, and silence had won. Weeks after the verdict, the Whitmore house felt different. The silence was no longer heavy, it was gentle, like a blanket instead of a chain. Claire opened the windows each morning, letting fresh air sweep through rooms that had once held secrets. Isabel began her new life in a small apartment, sunlight spilling across her floors. Emily visited often, their laughter echoing in spaces that had once been filled with fear. Letters passed between Isabel and Claire, not of survival anymore, but of beginnings, books read, gardens planted, mornings lived without dread. Claire tended her porch garden, herbs sprouting in neat rows. Neighbors waved, no longer curious whispers but genuine warmth. She realized she had built something Ethan could never touch: peace. The reckoning had ended, but its echo was freedom. And in the quiet, Claire finally found her voice, not in words, but in the life she chose to live.